many of you are standing on the railroad grade right here. So this is a pivot point in where they had to stay away from the lake and come around to this point right here. Those of you who, as we did come across that miles of flat out there, if you thought, hey, they didn't come this way, you're right. Bidwell Bartleson did not come across there. There was no convenient road. They had to go way up above and back, and your map shows that hump in the, so straight lines were not always the convenient way to go on these. So just as a reference point, over to this side we've got the Promontory Mountains, and of course the lake is here. Down here's the Hoggup Mountains. Can't see it from here, but when we get out of ways so you can see behind, there's a mountain range that's got kind of a pinnacle point in it. That's the Newfoundland Mountains. And then later today we'll get on over towards the Pilot Mountains. When Bidwell Bartleson came across here, they came, like I say, here, and then not far out here they started angling. And we'll talk a little more about that as they're heading for 10 Mile Spring. And they go past the Wildcat Mountains. And the Wildcat Mountains are really not they're Wildcat Hills is a better nomenclature. But watch for those as you go out there and you say, hey, there's nothing very tall. But you think of them being in wagons, and the even small ledges were obstacles. And so they go around the lower side of the Wildcat Mountains. And then over here we will come past, Eli, what are we doing? Just mention Locomotive Springs?
Yeah, they missed Locomotive Springs, and that's where we're going to turn and go.
Okay. We won't go to Locomotive either. You'll say, hey, there's nothing here except some marsh water, and some of it's marginal in its quality and things, but they did have a spring there that had reasonable water in it, but they missed it by a little over a mile and a half. And they headed and they were desperate for water. And so it brings up a question here, maybe a good spot to talk just a little bit about the Indians. Indians made all kinds of trails out here, and they've been here for a long, long time. Over here in the Hoggup Mountains, there's the Hoggup Cave, been documented and excavated at running about 9,000 years, as there is one out near Wendover. Dead Man's Cave has also been professionally excavated, and everything from seeds to pollen and all kinds of things examined there, and it also runs around 9,000 years. And the conclusion was, as the Indians used this as a trade route. And I think we all vastly underestimate the trade route of the Indians. And the thing that the professionals look at is things like the pollen and the seeds and all of the rest, but also they look for obsidian. Because you find obsidian, they can tell where it came from. Obsidian around here, quite a lot of it came from Nevada, some came from Idaho. But they were traders. The Promontory Mountains down there has a cave, which was an Indian dwelling, and they have found artifacts there that originate with the Athabasca. That's the Indians out of northern Canada and Alaska. And if you go to, just stretching a little bit, we go to central Utah, they found feathers and things that come from the macaw bird. That's Yucatan. And then it gets more detailed or more complicated from there as far as the trade routes that come. So that's an interesting thing. And so the Indians made a lot of trails. And so it's easy for us to say, well, why don't they follow an Indian trail and find the spring? Because they know they're going to go to a spring. But what's the question? How far? How far? And then you look out this way and think about this as we head out across here, that you're looking here, and what's out there? That's Salt Lake. Who in the world would ever think there was fresh water between the trail here and the Great Salt Lake? But there was. It was Locomotive Springs, and they didn't miss it. They missed another spring we'll mention as we go out towards 10 Mile. They missed another spring at the top, north of them. They went in between them. And one can only imagine the discussions that they had and the opinions that were held to the group, well, let's try this, let's go this, and well, your idea didn't work last time, let's do my idea this time, and go on and on, and things. The wonder and the miracle of it all is, survived.
They didn't use scouts?
Hey, what?
They didn't use scouts, did they?
No, yes and no. The question was is that they didn't use scouts. And there were times in which the record will say that they sent scouts out. In fact, when they were back here, they sent scouts to find the St. Mary's River, or the Humboldt. And they came back finally. They were a few days late, but when they came back, they reported that the river was 5 days' journey. And that is interesting because that 5 days' journey took them straight past the north slope of the Wildcat Mountains. And when the group got to the Wildcat Mountains, they turned south. They didn't follow the pilot orientation that they used. They turned south. The one thing they were sure of going south was this is a good supply of water, because they could tell by the terrain, by the greenery and the vegetation, that there was water along the Wildcat Mountains. So they went south. Again, there's part of the discussion of what to do. Another thought is some of you are looking at the rail marker over there, and I hope all of you do take a look at it. This is a project of the group that a few of us here belong to, the Oregon-California Trail Association, the Crossroads chapter, which are active in doing quite a few things. And back in the center where we were, there's a display of the trails, and there's some brochures there tell you a little bit about our website and things. But one of the things that we're take very seriously is marking the trails. And there are some people in past years who did a lot of documenting where the trail is. And that's all well and good, but we need to mark it. And that's part of our chapter's project. We put in markers, 3 to 10 of them a year. And like this one back here. This one, incidentally, was shot by a shotgun, and I actually couldn't read it anymore. And one of the guys in our chapter said, hey, I can fix that. So he loads up his generator and his power tools, and he comes out and grinds the little sign out that's in the rail across there and replaces it with a new one. The criteria that we use for putting in these markers is we put a statement there that comes from somebody's journal that tells something that happened there. Not somewhere else, but happened there. And that's where we put those markers in. So that's a continual process and project that our chapter deals with. This is our recent documentation of all of them we put in. We're over 130 of those markers on various trails that go even from the Spanish Trail up to the Hudspeth Trail that's in southern Idaho. And anyone want to glance at this, you're welcome to do so. But not just the way we make sure the future generations know where those trails are is to have good markings. And
Terry, would you tell what's involved in setting a T marker?
a T marker is railroad rails, which have been donated to us, by the way. And then we cut them in lengths. The guy volunteers and cuts them, and they stand about this high. They have a cross member on the bottom of a railroad rail, and then the wider one at the top. That you see this, us old men dig a hole in the ground and put in 3 or 4 sacks of crete and pour some water on it, and that's how we get them in there. The animals don't take them over, and not very many of them are bothered even by man, but man's always the worst enemy of any sign. So they are permanent, and we put them wherever we can get permission and to have access and journal entries that apply in the place there. We put one in a few years ago down not far off the Pony Express Trail, and it went up, and the road ended at a salt lick. I'm sure there are not very many people who are going to see that marker, but we had it documented, and our people said, hey, let's just mark this, and it doesn't have to be on a thoroughfare. We just want to mark the places and things. So we're dedicated to that. Other questions?
What Indians were in here Utes?
Pardon?
What Indians were in here?
Indians, various divisions of the Shoshone were through here. The Blackfoot were further north, generally speaking. The Paiutes are a little further south, generally speaking. But some of those were the, they gathered the locusts and they gathered the seeds and they dried the locusts. They get the locusts and pull the hind legs off. They have those Barbie things on. Throw that away and then they sun dry or dry the locust, and that becomes part of their very healthy food for winter. Anyway, somebody else knows more about that than I do.
I got a question. When did the buffalo become extinct here?
Buffalo gradually went out. The early pioneers that came down Echo Canyon found skulls. The early trappers found buffalo up in southern Idaho, even over towards Fort Hall.
I understand that a hard winter drove what was left out into the lake.
There's probably a combination of things, but I think a season did have something to do with it. There came, by the time they got to the 1850s, there's very few buffalo this side of the Sweetwaters, or this side of the Continental Divide. They'd mostly gone back. But there are buffalo skulls around that they knew that they had been here.
The Indians had
We have
horses too.
diaries that say at the west end of the Red Desert Great Divide on Interstate 80, just east of Rock Springs, were the last sightings in 1849 and 50.
Is that right? 1849 and 50, sightings the west end of the Red Desert, there between Rock Springs and Rawlins. So there's an evolving process in all of this. Other questions?
Just on your Indians, it was the northern Shoshone that were up through this area, and as he was mentioning, they all ate different things, and so they identified the particular group by the name of what they ate. So you had diggers and sheep eaters and the snakes, and up where we live in Alamo, they were the pine nut eaters.
Oh, yes.
So that was how they named the tribe, was according to their food.
Thank you. Named the tribe according to their food, whether the diggers or the pine nut eaters. And this area up here, incidentally, it was a good pine nut area. Find pine nuts in a lot of places. But the Indians from over in Box Elder County would come over to Yost, Sagwitch and his group, to get pine nuts. Why? Because they were bigger. They're better. That's a man thing. You go where the bigger fish are. Doesn't matter how long it takes you to get there. Right? Anything else? I tell us something. I don't have all the answers. Anything? Comment?
But when the Indians got horses, they're able to travel further and hunted along
Yes.
too. That made a big difference.
Yeah. And some of these tribes down here never had horses.
Right.
Placed them at a severe disadvantage for many reasons. Eli?
Let's give Carrie a big hand.